food production. We have our own chooks and other animals and so on. And it's been quite exciting to seriously come to grips with, can you on a couple of acres become relatively self-sufficient? And the fact is, yes. Lee mentioned that Queensland started to do some interesting things, and Peter Beattie pushed that along quite well when he was Premier, including Queensland Oil Vulnerability Task Force. And it really got serious about what can Brisbane do. Brisbane is one of those cities that if we didn't have it, I think Brisbane and Adelaide are alike. If we didn't have those cities today, we couldn't find a reason for building them. And Queensland is sort of such a vast state with resources all in areas where the people aren't. And all those people are in the wrong areas. Just last week I was twice in the Gold Coast, for example. And thank heavens for those disastrous floods that have come upon, because they didn't have any water at all a month ago. And it was incredible to see these vast numbers of people and high-rises and buildings and yet not have water at all. The floods have arrived in the nick of time for Queensland. And when you look at the way we've built our cities and the places where we've built our cities, we've got to look not just at things like water, for example, but also energy. Energy resources. The primary focus of the Queensland Task Force was to present the most likely time frame when oil would peak, assess the impact on it, mining. We have a problem here in New South Wales. We're building more and more coal mines, as the front page 1 and 2 of Sydney Morning Herald today describes, and as we know because we've been to the area of the Hunter, we've spoken with the people in the coal mining areas. Coal mining is great. We're shipping it all off to India and to China and to Japan, the three main. That's wonderful. You don't realise how much fresh water is wasted because of coal. We're the driest continent on earth. The government of New South Wales is actually flying blind on this whole issue. And they refuse to act on information for this state. Well over a year ago, as I mentioned, we were responsible for speaking about different fuel types, the economic sectors, what impact would peak oil peaking and not being as available have upon our hospitals, our schools, our emergency services. What is that going to do for coal production? Because quite frankly, you cannot produce coal without using an enormous amount of oil and water, as I said. What's it going to do to the economy? What's it going to do to employment trends? But let me tell you, we voted in splendid isolation. No one else cared. I'd ask that special attention be given to the most vulnerable people on society. The government seems to come up with one answer only. You should walk more and ride bicycles. Mr. Chairman, I examined the present group of people here tonight, and I have decided that there are only 5 would or could have possibly ridden bicycles to this meeting tonight. Now, it is useless talking about let the population ride bicycles. The fact is, if I took this as an example tonight, perhaps 5 of you could ride a bicycle. I'm not necessarily saying far enough to get to Parliament House, but maybe far enough to get to somewhere else. You see, really, it's a grand idea for young and fit and able people. Some of us will walk, and once you stop driving your car to the shops and start to walk around to the shops, you've actually achieved a great deal. Let's review some of the basic facts as I finish. Oil production has already peaked in 11 countries that supplied oil to Australia. There are 13 countries from which we buy oil. 11 countries are now of the 13, are in decline. The other 2 countries, Saudi Arabia and Arab Emirates, their supplies are apparently stable. However, it's also believed by some petroleum experts that these these countries have overestimated the amount of reserves they have, which has to do with getting a commercial advantage on the price for which they sell it. And we ought not to just blindly accept what they say about their reserves. The fact is, 11 of the 13 countries that export oil to us are now in the declining days of production. Professor Steve Yeftev, author of America and the Persian Gulf, highlights a number of impacts that we have to be prepared for. In the absence of alternatives to oil, prices are going to rise steeply as demand outpaces the available supply. Those price rises could trigger global recessions or even worse. If we have found affordable alternatives, it'll probably take decades to actually transition to use them. The Middle East will become more and more powerful in relationship to the West. I remember giving a lecture in 1989 saying that the next century belongs to the Chinese. In point of fact, the whole economic base will have shifted from the United States to Asia, and in particular to China, and the latter part of the 21st century, which we're already in, will belong to India rather than to China, as India surpasses the population of China. The Middle East will become more powerful. Fears about competition for oil may trigger conflicts among nations. The US and other powers may move to secure oil supplies, which could create broader conflict with the Muslim world, which already believes that the American policy in Iraq and Iran and in Afghanistan is already driven by the need for oil rather than any other noble idea. Nothing we do is going to make this situation go away, but we have to learn to live without it becoming a catastrophe. As a Christian minister, I believe that we're commissioned by God to be good stewards of the earth. Brendan Davidson describes it as earth stewardship, and I believe that's my role as a Christian. God shows Adam the Garden of Eden and instructs him to tend it and keep it. And that's what I think we have to do with the world in which we live. If you want to have a look at some things which I've said on this and other topics, I've got a few folders here, and you can take them.
Very much, Reverend Dr. Gordon Moyes, for that electrifying talk, and very much matters of very deep concern to all of us. Our fourth speaker, Dr. Gary Glazebrook, has had over 15 years policy experience in government and 14 years consulting experience, focusing on urban transport and planning. He currently teaches in urban planning at the University of Technology, Sydney. Gary has published widely in the fields of urban transport, including a 30-year public transport plan for Sydney in 2009. He's a member of the Planning Institute of Australia and the International Union of Public Transport and the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. He's also been an advisor to the Independent Public Inquiry into Public Transport for Sydney, and has a particular interest in how to make our cities more sustainable. Welcome, Dr. Gary Glazebrook.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk tonight. I feel a bit overwhelmed. We've had some fantastic speakers tonight, and I know it's getting a little bit late, so I'll probably skip through the first part of my presentation on peak oil because I think it's already been covered. Coping with peak oil, and I'd like to really end on perhaps a slightly more positive note. I know at least one of the gentlemen in the audience here tonight considers me to be a raving optimist. Most people think I'm a terrible pessimist, but I guess in relation to these kinds of issues, I hope that we can actually maintain some level of civilisation. I'm not too sure how civilised we actually are even now, but it's pretty obvious really from what everybody said tonight, peak oil is actually a looming threat. And of course climate change, in my view, is just fractionally less urgent in the sense of, you know, the immediate here and now, but I think ultimately is really the really big threat that we're all facing. And as the other speakers have mentioned, we've really got to deal with both of those issues really in the very short term and in the same time frame. We also have to deal with all these other issues to do with health and other kinds of issues with our organ form. And as has been mentioned, there are a lot of countries now that have passed peak production, so I won't go back over that territory again, but essentially the United States back in 1970, more recently countries like the UK, Norway, Mexico and so forth. In fact, really the bulk of oil producing countries are already past peak production. There's only a few now which are actually increasing production over the last couple of years, particularly countries like former Soviet Union and so forth. And as already been mentioned by Lee and others, people like Sir Richard Branson, but also the mainstream commercial media out there, organisations like Barclays Bank, Bank of America, all these kinds of financial organisations are now admitting, really for the first time, it's only really in the last couple of years, these organisations are finally recognising the whole concept of peak oil, the fact that oil prices are likely to be very unstable, they're likely to rise again. Probably, my guess would be sometime in 2012 we'll see the next really serious spike in oil prices. And we know that one of the reasons why oil prices are so unstable is not really to do with speculators, but it's really to do with the fact that there is a very low, what's called the elasticity, price elasticity for both the demand side and the supply side for oil. Some estimates say it's as low as 2 to 5%. What that means is you need to have a 50% increase in price to get something like a 2 or 3% reduction in demand. So you can imagine that when your oil supplies are going down, you can see a very rapid and sudden increase in prices. What that does is precipitates the things like the global financial crisis that we've seen before. So one of the ways that the oil situation will work its way through the economy is actually to cause all this instability, all this movements of capital and all the rest of it. And a lot of countries will fall into, well, the next time round, the trouble is with the GFC last time, governments went out and simply borrowed a whole heaps of money to keep the economy afloat. They probably won't be able to do that next time. So we could be in for a really serious economic situation within 2 years. It reminds me, I think, when Bill Clinton was the president and there was a debate going on with George W. Bush, and the quote was, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think that really should read the other way around. It's the stupid economy. We've actually got an economy that's not really functional. And one of the things that most economists have got not the faintest clue about is the concept of energy return on energy invested. And they don't realise that what we've been using up is our very high quality energy resources, the cheap stuff. For every 1 unit of energy in, you get 100 units of energy out. And as we move away from the oil that's just sitting under the sand in the Middle East and so on, as we start trying to get oil out of tar sands in Canada, or as we start trying to get it out of coal, or as we start trying to get these other offshore oil resources like the Brazilian stuff and so forth, the amount of energy to go in to get 1 unit of energy go out increases, which means the net energy coming back to us is less and less. And that really implies the price has to rise fairly exponentially. So it's a concept that's not really understood, I suspect, by economists. Now I'd like to really focus a bit more about what do we do about all this, and do we have time to actually adjust? And I'm not sure that we do. I think technically we have time to adjust. I'm not at all sure that politically, our political institutions, as Lee and Gordon have mentioned, at the moment they are flying blind. They have no interest in this kind of debate. They seem to be completely oblivious to it, which just absolutely staggers me, but I'm not. The question is whether we're smart enough to actually realise that and do something about it in time. So what we need to do, and oil in particular is very much implicated in transport. The other fossil fuels, of course, go into electricity and other sorts of things, and they produce our superphosphate and our plastics. And natural gas is very important for that. And those kinds of, there really isn't actually a shortage of coal per se. So we've got plenty of coal, particularly in this country. And I was looking at the data in the United States, it's quite staggering. They now produced last year 1.2 billion tonnes of coal. There is one mine in Wyoming, in the United States, just one Megamine produces 100 million tonnes of coal every year out of one mine.
Whereabouts was it?
It's in the Powder River Basin. And so the scale of mining going on in America is about 5 times or 4 times what we produce in this country. Of course, we're actually you're going gangbusters and trying to produce coal over Hunter Valley and out of central Queensland as well. They're just doubling the port capacity at Newcastle. So there is actually a lot of coal out there, and in fact they can dig it out pretty cheaply with these huge machines. But it's not that easy to convert coal into oil, and in fact the real problem is even if we were to do that, we would run bang smack into the greenhouse problem, because we get more CO2 per unit of energy if we do that than even if we use coal. Even if we use oil. So we actually have no choice but to start reducing the amount of energy we actually use, particularly in our transport systems, as fast as we can. What that means in our cities, we have to shift to these more energy efficient modes, which is, I think some of us, perhaps more of us need to get on a bicycle of some description, maybe a tricycle. But we can have electrically assisted bicycles. My brother's got one he lives up in Maleny in Queensland, and it's just fantastic. You just use the power when you get to a steep hill, you put on a bit of electric power, you keep on going, you don't have to wander all over the road like this, you don't work up a huge sweat, but you just keep pedalling, you get your exercise, use very little energy, and it's actually a lot safer. And I think a lot of people will be on these kind of small machines in the future. We also have to increase the energy efficiency within the modes, so cars will have to become more efficient, etc. And anything that's electric should be powered immediately by green power. So all our trains will run on 100% green energy. That could happen almost overnight in the next couple of years. Yeah, the amount of energy we use in our trains, even the whole of City Rail could run on green power for an extra $28 million a year. That's out of a budget at the moment of $2.5 billion a year. So for about 1% of the cost of running the City Rail system, we could run all the trains on 100% green power. So why don't we do it? These are some forecasts I did in my 30-year plan. Business as usual means that everything goes up 30-35% in terms of energy use, travel, everything else. What I looked at was what can we do realistically over the next 25 years, 30 years, whatever. If we reduce the amount of travel we do by say 10%, if we double the amount of public transport usage that we have and double the amount of walking and cycling, we'll end up with no more traffic in 30 years' time than we have now. If all the vehicles that are running at that time are using, say, half the energy use that they are now, we'll actually be able to cut our oil use by about 50% from where we are today over the next 30 years. Now, however, that may not be fast enough, because the rate at which oil is going to be in decline is actually going to be very steep. Starting from 2012. The next year or two there will be some increases from Saudi Arabia, some new fields coming on stream, maybe in development for a number of years. After 2011, we are into a situation where there are no more major new fields coming on stream, and where essentially we're really seriously, we're already probably past peak production, but the rate of decline is going to accelerate post-2012. It's only 2 years away. And the government still has no understanding of this. So what we need to do in our cities, and the Metropolitan Strategy document came out this afternoon, released by the government, and it says we're headed for 6 million people in Sydney by 2036. And it says, it talks a lot about where the people would live and where they can work and how we can get around. Now, we did a major exercise, and I'll talk about it in a minute, for the Herald on the public transport inquiry. So we have some fairly concrete views about what can actually be done. But one of the things we can do, we know that the amount of driving that people don't do is a function of where they live in the city. So the closer in you live and the higher density you live, the amount of driving that you do in your cars goes down quite substantially. So it is possible with land use change to actually modify the amount of reliance on the car that we have. And that's the sort of thing that we need to do from a land use perspective. And that's been going on gradually. We've been having more and more consolidation, so the percentage of housing in Sydney that's actually in apartments and townhouses and so on has been going up over the years. And I believe will probably continue to go up, so that we won't be building as many new suburbs on the fringe as we have in the past. The rate of expansion of the urban footprint will definitely slow down. I don't think it will stop completely. I think there will still be some new suburbs built, but the rate at which we'll be building those suburbs will slow right down. On the other hand, there will be more consolidation. I know the people of Baringo don't like that. I know lots of people hate the idea of having more density, but I don't think we really have much of a choice. We're a bit of a low density city on world terms, and I think we're going to have to learn to live in smaller houses, because at the moment we have the biggest houses in the world. I was reading only 2 days ago, Stocklands, one of the major housing developers in Australia, has just released some new estates in the outskirts of Melbourne. These are right in the outer suburbs, and the size of the allotments, 212 square metres, which is about the size of an inner suburban terrace house in Sydney, and they sold like hotcakes. So there is, and they have small houses on them, and they're saying there's been a shift just in the last year or two in housing demand. People are no longer wanting big mansions anymore. This is just literally since the GFC. So I think there are things that will change. We will change what sort of houses we live in. We will change where we will live. All those kinds of things. We'll certainly change how we move around our cities. We'll have to. We won't have a choice. But the faster we do it, and the more we get our governments to make this possible, the less the crunch that will happen to us. I think we're probably still in for a bit of time. Where we actually work is going to be important. If we spread our jobs all over the suburbs, then there's almost no way to get there except by car. If we focus our jobs into key centres, then you can actually make public transport viable for getting to those centres. Like the City of Sydney here has one of the highest uses of public transport in the world. 75% of all workers come by public transport. Only about 20% come by car. In the future, that could probably be as low as 10% coming by car. So virtually everybody can either come by public transport, and then more and more people living in the CBD, living in the inner suburbs, can actually walk and cycle. So the amount of actual petrol used to get people to and from jobs in the city could be virtually zero. It's not that much now, in fact. So how we structure our city, where we put our jobs, where we put our houses, how big those houses are, and how we run our transport is going to be absolutely crucial. As I mentioned, I've been working on this independent public inquiry. Brought out its report back in February. It's a 450-page document, so I don't expect you all to read it unless you have trouble sleeping at night. But there's a lot of detail in there about exactly what we can do in this city in terms of restructuring our transport. And we had detailed plans, it's hard to read, but covering all modes and all suburbs in Sydney. We need to particularly extend the public transport networks in Western Sydney, where they're very thin on the ground. And in the inner parts of the city, we need to enhance things and improve things and give it more capacity, make more frequency, all those kinds of things. Integrated fares, all those sorts of things to make it much more convenient to use public transport. We need to double the amount of public transport use in the city over the next 25 years or so. That's entirely feasible. We need a new organisation to do it because we believe the current political system is broke, and we need what we call Transport for Sydney, an organisation that will produce a plan, update it every 4 years, and then get on with the job of doing it, rather than having all this political shenanigans of putting something in the margin seats. We did some survey work as part of this exercise. We surveyed 2,400 people around Sydney, and we found, even to our surprise, 62% favoured a high public transport investment scenario, 21% a high investment in road scenario, and 17% a low investment in both. We asked people, when we asked them about the investment, we said to them, you're going to have to pay for it with additional taxes, higher fares, congestion charges on the roads, parking charges, all these kind of things. And even despite all of that, that's what they wanted. They were prepared to pay. We worked out we can fund $36 billion of a new public transport investment in the city over the next 30 years, with additional taxes, charges, fares, congestion charges, etc. Now the trouble is the politicians are too scared to raise taxes in this country. And that's what we need to do. We are under-taxing ourselves. We are a low-tax country. So of course we have low-quality public transport, low-quality health and education. If we want to maintain ourselves as a first-world country, we are going to have to take a haircut on our lifestyles. Maybe we don't get the flat-screen TV, that size one, maybe we get one this size. Maybe we don't have all the consumer goodies that we have. maybe we have a few more collective goods. Maybe we have a more society approach rather than the individual approach. If we don't, we're in for big trouble. As Gordon mentioned, cities in America are in a diabolical straits. Places like Detroit where they're bulldozing whole suburbs. The whole American dream, suburban dream, is seriously under threat. And I don't think even the Americans fully understand just how unsustainable the whole American system, and mind you, the same applies to a large extent in this country as well. So we have to change. Now the public, we believe the public are willing to go on with this. I think they're miles ahead of the politicians. It's just very, very hard to get this message through to the politicians. They're too scared. We looked at all the financing of this. We proved that you can actually do this without losing the AAA rating, which Treasury here is obsessed about. And we found that really the reason why we're relying too much on the car. It's the most expensive form of transport, apart from being the least sustainable and the worst for your health. It's also the most expensive when you look at the total social cost. So as a society, this is something we won't be able to afford in the future. Our lives, we are going to suffer higher energy costs on all fronts, even without carbon trading, but then when you're adding carbon trading, it's going to be higher again. Food costs will probably go up. Water is going up, it's getting more and more expensive. A lot of things will become more expensive, so we are going to lose some of our so-called standard of living. There's really not much alternative to that at the moment. So we have to be smart about how we get around our cities and use more economically efficient means like public transport. Within that, we need to use the right kind of mode, and in our report we recommended scrapping the metro because we thought it was a $5 billion waste of money on a badly designed public transport project. However, we are fully in favour of the right kind of public transport in the right kind of corridor, and that means you've got to really examine all the modes and see what mode's most appropriate for what particular job. So, for example, in the inner city, we think light rail, it's very pleasing to see the government's finally agreed to extend the light rail and to put light rail into the city. We're still having a debate with them about trying to get them to put it in George Street, get some buses out of the city. And I was walking through the city today, and it's just York Street, George Street is just absolute wall-to-wall buses. It is completely insane. It's inefficient, it's polluting, it's not, it's just insane, So we need to get the government to wake up to some of these things. The rest of the world has got on the light rail bandwagon some years ago. We are the last city in the world to do it. But we do also need these local mobility solutions to get around, not just bicycles, but I'll be on one of those mobility cycles, mobility scooters. I'm just waiting to get on one of those. What I'd like to see is every second suburban street in Sydney should have a 20 km/h speed limit, and cars should give way to bikes and bikes should give way to pedestrians. And I call them greenways. And this is really what happens in the Netherlands. If you're in a car and you hit a bicycle or vice versa, the car is always in the wrong. And if the bicycle hits the pedestrian, the cyclist is always in the wrong. So we have to have more priority for, I'd like to see helmets removed from bicycles. Because when they brought in the helmet legislation, people stopped riding bikes. So, and if you want to have public access bike hire schemes like they have all over Europe now, in a place like Montreal, they don't work when you have to carry a helmet around. And you can't hire a helmet, etc., etc. So if we want to do what the rest of the world is doing, we're going to have to throw away our helmet laws. It should be safe enough to ride a bike, but you don't need to have a helmet. This is a debate we have to have. It's been in the papers the last few days. Obviously we need more fuel-efficient cars, hybrids, electric cars, etc. But that's only part of the answer. As I mentioned, we've got to change our whole cities and our whole way we get around our cities. But all of those things are needed together. So basically, we're going to face higher oil and petrol prices within 2 years, in my view. And we're running out of time to do that. But other cities are adapting. So if we don't adapt, we're going to be the mugs. We're going to be the last people left. We're going to be hit the hardest. It's only a matter of just common sense. So I don't know how you get the message through. I know that our speakers here tonight have absolutely done their bit over the road here in this chamber, trying to raise these issues. How we get this through to the politicians, globe, I don't know, to be honest. But I think that's the task basically. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glasbrook, for putting the anatomy of Greater Sydney under an ultrasound. This, in fact, is what should have been done a long time ago.
It is in this very room, in the Jubilee room, when Dr. Bakhtiari, who worked 20 years in the Iranian National Oil Company, briefed the Senate inquiry on oil supplies in a grueling testimony 3 hours from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. And he told me that Iran will no longer export oil by 2015, 1-5. Now, a year later, Dr. Bakhtiari died in Tehran under suspicious circumstances. I know people who met him, and he told them that he risked his life informing us about what's going on in relation to oil in Iran. And I think we should have 1 minute of silence and prayer for his soul. Thank you.
Yes, it's on. My name's Mary White. One of the things that's always puzzled me, in Australia, the politicians, with the exception of the Greens, will not use the word peak oil. When questioned, they use all sorts of evasive phrases such as energy security, or they change the subject. But the interesting thing is, this is a worldwide feature of politicians. They have the same problem in the UK and in the United States. They will not use the words peak oil. They will not discuss the subject. And for the life of me, I really can't understand why they won't even argue about it. And Dr. Glazebrook mentioned Holland. And